Welcome, and thank you for being here, everyone. Before we begin, it is important to acknowledge that we are gathered here today on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam Nation. The University of British Columbia, and by extension Green College, is situated on the lands and waters to which the Musqueam people are the traditional and rightful stewards, and under a context of active settler colonialism. In order to affirm anti-oppression and anti-racism everywhere, we must first address how we are complicit in the continuous colonial process here at UBC and at Green College as well. I would like to personally ask that we recognize that decolonization is not simply a metaphor for social justice and societal improvement, but that it involves a material repatriation and a giving back of Indigenous land and life. This acknowledgement serves as a first step in fulfilling our constant responsibility to Indigenous peoples and the land that we organize on. As we discuss the topic of open access education, participatory knowledge production, and accessible learning today, I ask that we reflect on the crucial and integral role that decolonization must play in order to meet these democratic educational ideals. Thank you. So welcome again, everyone, to Green College and to our discussion today, opening up our coursework and coursebooks. This session will explore new models and projects for interactive and collaborative ways of engaging participatory learning through open educational resources. In this talk, Renren Yang will introduce his open access UBC Wiki project, in which dozens of students contribute to creating encyclopaedic and updated entries on keywords in Chinese popular culture. And following which, Samuel Beswick will introduce his open access casebook and quizzes on tort law that professors and students around the world can utilize and rework online. We'll also like to invite you as audience members to come and discuss the opportunities and obstacles to designing and using open educational resources projects later in this talk. And if you are coming from the live stream today and wish to ask a question, please go to www.slido.com. You can enter the event code 92022 and type in your question, and Elahe, our fabulous tech facilitator, will read out your question. And all of that info, if you're coming from the live stream, is online. This talk is part of a larger lecture series led by some of our leading scholars here at Green College entitled Democratizing Research and Teaching Models for Action. If you enjoy what you're hearing today and you want to come and hear more, please consider coming on the next panel in this series, The Joys and Complications of Participatory Research, which will take place on November 3rd at 5 here at the Coach House. So now, just to introduce the panel quickly and get into the good stuff, we have Professor Renren Yang, who is an assistant professor of Asian Studies here at UBC, and also Alisa Zeng, who is an honors student in English Literature and Asian Studies. We have my professor, Samuel Beswick, who is an assistant prof at the Allard School of Law. And finally, my name is Zachary Couture. I am a JD candidate here at UBC and also a resident member of Green College. And with that, I will give the floor to Dr. Yang to discuss his project.
Great. Thank you, Zach, for your introduction. I also want to thank Mark and Heather for their support of this lecture series. Good afternoon, everyone. I want to introduce you to our participatory open access wiki project we have been doing in my contemporary Chinese popular culture class, as you can see from the website here. And the wiki project is entitled Keywords in Chinese Popular Culture. So the idea is to ask students to work in groups on different keywords that have appeared and spread in contemporary Chinese societies, especially the kinds of vocabularies that have gone viral in Chinese-speaking world. The kinds of words people would use, misuse, and invent or reinvent to describe or comment on central aspects of their everyday life in contemporary China. So the first part, I want to talk about the motivation or inspiration of this project. Part of the reason for me to create this open access or for me to ask students to take on this open project is my belief in the pedagogical model student as producer. I want students to produce knowledge that they care about, to claim ownership of their own observations, and to develop substantiate provocative ideas by doing more research-related activities in my class. So another important reason for the genesis of this project is that students often come to talk to me and raise questions about contemporary Chinese popular culture that has not yet been addressed in existing scholarship. There are so many different reasons for that, right? Partially because contemporary Chinese pop culture has been changing and developing so fast. And there will be new words, new genres, new celebrities, and new shows coming out each year. So it's a kind of mission impossible for scholars to catch up with what is happening now, let alone conducting critical research into it in time. And also because there is often a time lag between the happening of some internet buzzwords in China and the translation of those words into the English-speaking world, so that many pop culture terms get lost, missed, or forgotten in this cross-cultural translation due to the information overload online, but also the difficulty to synchronize the two linguistic world, right? So that prompted me into thinking that perhaps I can invite my students to work on those terms themselves, because they are the consumers and the users of this culture. They have a lot of tacit knowledge of those terms and their implications, and they are able to conduct timely and intimate cross-cultural translation and communication. Of course, this project can be designed and promoted in this way because usually there is a high percentage of students in my class who are able to read or speak Chinese. And even if they're not speaking Chinese, they are consuming a lot of Chinese pop culture products. Another material condition for the possibility of doing this project is because of the affordances of UBC Wiki. You can see this website is a replica of the real Wikipedia, or the larger Wikipedia. It's a collaborative space designed for easy editing, easy creating, and easy sharing of resources and information within the UBC community. This wiki site was born in the year 2006, and it uses the same technology and interface as Wikipedia, but it's only editable for CWL users, though anyone can view articles posted on the website. Okay, now let me briefly talk you through how this project works out. So usually I will give students a list of keywords I selected from contemporary Chinese popular culture, and students who signed up for the same keyword will end up being in the same group. Then they will divide the labor within each group and set out to write about a wiki page devoted to their keyword. I gave them a suggested template to work on in the guidelines here. So it's a fixed structure. Their wiki entry will just follow this suggested structure, and also provide more detailed guidelines on how to write up each section. If they want to compose some additional section, or if they encounter any research-related questions, they can always talk to me, because some of the sections really demand serious research and collaboration. So for example, in addition to find out how a particular word is used and misused in transmedia locations, they are also expected to find the counterpart term or concept in non-Chinese or Western pop culture. This also enables many students whose mother tongue is neither Chinese or English to conduct research in their own languages and bring their outcome for a cross-cultural dialogue here. So here is an example. This is a web page devoted to Chinese term liao, which can be used as either a verb or an adjective to allure or alluring. And this group illustrates the multiple meanings and usage of the word in Chinese pop culture, different associations of this word. And when they talk about the counterpart term in non-Chinese pop culture, they made references to the word picking up in the English-speaking world in the West, right? The aigyo in Korean, as well as the nampa in Japanese pop culture, right? With due attention to the subtle semantic differences and different implications of those terms in different cultural contexts. Furthermore, in addition to summarizing and synthesizing existing studies related to the keyword, which is more like a literature review, students are expected to discuss the use of the keyword to reflect on the kinds of larger social, political, and intellectual issues and conflicts in Chinese society. This is also a way to train them as a cultural studies scholar and to practice the symptomatic reading method we have taught in class. So here is another example, which is a term, evolution, becomes very popular in recent years. And this term suddenly becomes popular in recent years and is used by Chinese people to comment on the competitive social environment they find themselves in. This group of students are here relate the spread of this word to a lot of different social issues in Chinese society. Social problems such as income disparity and lack of opportunities, and the cultural problem of 996, basically meaning the requirement of employees to work 6 days a week from 9 to 9 every day. They also relate this word to the nationalist campaign of the aspirational values promoted by the Chinese Communist Party. Okay, finally, I want to say a few words about the larger significance of this project. For the scholarly community, I think this project observes and documents lived realities in recent years to theorize, give students the opportunity to theorize pop culture and produce fresh and updated knowledge and critical observations of contemporary Chinese popular culture, especially for Western audience. And for the students, is a rare opportunity for them to share their works and findings to the larger public, the global community, instead of making them feel that they're just writing something for the instructor or just producing some disposable assignment. Now they are given a degree of authority in their work, and the effort, the time go into their work crystallized into a public asset that enjoys a wider readership. And finally, for larger public, these projects create many open education resources that are free of cost and access barriers. They carry legal permissions for open use. So for anyone interested in learning more about contemporary Chinese popular culture, they will able to consult these pages. So we have been developing several sets of at least two lists of keywords up to this year. And we are, I'm teaching this class also this term, so there will be a new list of keywords coming out from this year's work. So, and also I sometimes will receive strangers' emails asking for more references mentioned in those pages because they were looking for some particular terms in Chinese pop culture. And they find a lot of useful examples and perspectives from the work students completed here. Okay, thank you so much. And that is all for my part.
So thank you, Professor. Are there any questions for Professor Yang before I share my experiences?
Okay, so the question is from Maddie. She's asking, have you received pushback when introducing open source resources? And if so, where does this pushback primarily come from? Colleagues, administration, or publishers?
I think this is a very important question. May we reserve this larger question maybe in the general discussion, because I think both Sam and me may have something to say about this one. But thank you so much for the question. We're going to keep it here.
I'm wondering if the students... I'm wondering if the students kind of comment on one another, or if there's a kind of peer review process, because it seems like with Wikipedia, right, there's sort of a citation needed, right, or the kind of battle of the editors, and I wondered if you integrated that into your project at all.
Thank you so much, Browen. Yes, so after students complete the project, they're going to go through an anonymous peer review, which is part of the grading process. So they reflect on what they have learned from each other in their small personal reflection, but they are also I'm also using iPeer for them to comment on each other's contribution to the work, which is very important because sometimes the contributions are not uneven, right? But it's very, for me, it's very important experience to read how they have learned from each other, and there are some problems within the group as well. So I will give them some heads up next time. And I do think that is a very integral component of this project, especially for any group working project like this. Yeah. And I think, Alisa, maybe you may say something about this peer review later.
Thank you, Dr. Yang. I think my question is more about the UBC Wiki itself. I wonder if you mind sharing a bit more about how the general public find access about particular pages on UBC Wiki, because my experience is that if I'm searching any of these words on Google, UBC Wiki might not be the very first option that pops up in the search results. So, oh yes, it's SEO maximization, particularly because you mentioned that you do get emails from strangers that who indeed access those pages. So
I just want to mention the recent email I got is from a student who used to be a UBC student, now graduated. So he may have more intimate knowledge about the UBC Wiki, but
you're the first hit.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much, Google.
But
you want to use the English search, right? Because in the Chinese one, it's going to get you to the Chinese web page.
Yeah, so if you put them together, you're the first hit.
Then you don't have it.
But I think that's exactly where the question arises, because like the translation of the Chinese character is arguable, or may not be something that the person who searches this term come up with.
I agree. And I think, Tian, you are, thank you so much, Sam. You are making, actually this is a very important question because it's a question about translation, right? Do you have to be bilingual in order to get the results out, right? Because I agree, the Chinese term Liao could be translated into different English words, and this is just, it's a little bit arbitrary to translate it as alluring. And if, would it come out if I search different words, right? So maybe for anyone interested in exploring this cross-cultural translation, cross-cultural communication, it depends on which language you're looking for. If you're going from Chinese to English, you may come up with different English translations. If you go back from English to Chinese, then there may be different Chinese translations for you to use it. So yeah, it's a search skill that associated with the tricky question of intercultural translation. Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah.
So I assume that can be. So hello everyone. It's truly a pleasure to be here tonight or this afternoon to share my experiences of taking part in the Wiki project. To be extremely honest, initially when I first heard that we have a group project, I was like, oh no, a group project. Mainly because I was scared that I was going to get some unreliable group members. However, what I really liked was that Professor Yang allowed us to choose the keywords that interested us the most. So even if the group collaboration didn't go well, at least I can write on something that's interesting for me. And as Professor Yang mentioned, the anonymous peer review on iPeer really helped me kind of like relieves my stress from worrying about the unreliable group mates part, because we do get an individual grade based on that. So, but it turns out that my initial worry was actually true, because a group member decided to leave the group during that time. So it was like leaving me and the other group member who's here with us today, Carol, alone. So then I guess it's also good for us in some ways, because it was easier to divide everything in half to work on, and then we sort of get more independence. So we were working on the keyword countenance. So synthesizing existing secondary studies related to countenance is like a topic that I really wish to write on. Like looking at how studies about countenance from non-Chinese speaking cultures resonates with Chinese popular culture, kind of increases my understanding of the keyword and initiates conversations about how different regions perceive the idea of countenance. So because I really want to write on this subtopic, I had to kind of negotiate with Carol to take on this part, right? So then I was really happy that she was flexible about it. And this taught me the importance of continuous communication and dividing up the work based on our personal preferences, because I think how we managed to get this group project completed smoothly was a result of how we were able to write on the parts that we truly want to explore on. So I think overall, Carol really gave me an opportunity for self-improvement through providing different perspectives on how we can write about the keyword. And this is also the result of, again, discussing and negotiating with each other. And again, I was a bit concerned at the beginning that, oh, how can this be a group project when we only have 2 people, right? But then I think it turned out fine, so I'm good. And in relation to the wiki platform itself, I thought I was actually like pretty bad with using technology. So then I was a bit concerned about how it would be difficult to use. Like this is not a conventional way of submitting an essay onto Canvas and then you're done, right? This is something that you produce on a platform where people in the UBC community can get access to it. So yeah, I was a bit concerned. But then when I finally started to work on this project, I find that it was surprisingly convenient to navigate and edit, because this assignment, as Professor Yang has showed us, has a fixed template. So I kind of just have to follow the structure of things. I just focus on the research components more. I don't really need to worry about how I would like to format things. Another aspect that I find to be pretty helpful was that there were the past projects. So there are so many examples for me to look at and read through. While all of them brought ideas together under a wiki page, some pages were written in a more coherent way, and then like there are positive aspects where I can borrow and then put into my own. So I think that's really helpful. In addition, to support the information that we present on the wiki page, we needed to conduct a lot of research. So it's not like a facts dump where we just find everything online and then combine it together under a wiki page, but no. So Kara and I had to really find reliable sources and then be selective about what we want to put on the page. And another thing that we had to consider was the tone of writing that we should employ. Considering this is a wiki page and not an analytical essay, we wanted to write it in a more objective tone rather than a persuasive, argumentative tone, because this is not like me presenting a really original argument, thesis statement. So we kind of need to think about that. And as a result of working on the wiki project, I've learned to conduct thoughtful web searching and also how to really write in a different style than I would normally write with. So yeah, those are all my experiences.
Okay, my turn. Thanks very much, you guys. And so I'm going to speak about, my name's Sam Beswick, I teach at the law school. I'm going to speak about my project with my student Zach, and then we'll open it up to sort of a general Q&A time, so your chance to ask Renren and Alisa questions is not over yet. All right, so I want to talk to you about a resource that I put together this online casebook, which you can, if you get bored by anything that I'm saying, you can look up on your phone at this URL right here. Anyone can. So perhaps before I talk about the casebook, I should explain what a casebook is. So the two tools of a typical, particularly first-year law school course is the casebook and something called the Socratic method. Both tools were invented by a gentleman, Christopher Columbus Langdell, was his name, the first dean of Harvard Law School. And they have stuck because, in my opinion, they're quite useful and engaging ways to explore and engage with the law. So the idea of the case method is to figure out and sort of determine what the law is and how judges reason about the law by just reading cases. And so we read a lot of judgments in my class. I have organized them by topic, but we read through judgments, and that's what we're doing. We're not reading textbooks about judgments. We're literally reading the judgments compiled into cases, compiled into casebooks. And when I was at law school myself in New Zealand, my casebook tended to be kind of a ring-bound photocopies of the law reports, which are the sort of official publications of the judgments. So you kind of, it was a bit sort of, sometimes you had to rotate the book, and they were kind of, it was just photocopies, right? And it's slapped together, and you pick it up for about $30 from the printers at the university. Then I came to North America, and I discovered these things, which are professionally printed casebooks. This is one for tort law. It's not small. It makes a thud when you drop it. And to demonstrate, and so this is the book that all students would have to purchase a copy of. And this is a Canadian book. This is Canadian. This is by several friends of mine, actually. So I won't disparage them. But this is it's a well-trodden book. There are 3 Canadian tort law case books. So you can choose, traditionally you've been able to choose between one of 3. I'm now going to demonstrate the Socratic method of law school teaching. So Professor Gilbert, what drawbacks might you anticipate teaching from a material such as this? It's probably expensive. It's $190. And Professor Bird, do you anticipate any drawbacks of a material like this? All right. And how much of this book do you think you could teach in your tort law course? Half. That would be an ambitious course, having flipped through this. So there are, in my estimation at least, thank you, gentlemen, a number of, this is what my class is like. Zach's going to tell you in a moment, probably more terrifying. There are a number of kind of potential drawbacks with a resource like this. The other one, which wasn't mentioned, is you can't keyword search a physical book, which the kids these days love to be able to do, right? Not to mention the professors. So I thought when I started teaching tort law here, I had a few motivations for kind of going about it my own way. One was the accessibility idea. I thought, well, all of these cases are already available for free online. There's a website called Canly. In fact, my book is on Canly. It's a free resource. Every Canadian lawyer uses it. It has every judgment in Canada on it, and it's just freely searchable online, very accessible. The other kind of motivation was I didn't like a lot of the cases that were in the books that they were being provided. A lot of them were very boring. And the thing about tort law is about wrongdoing that people do to each other. And there are so many fun and interesting tort law cases out there that it's sort of very colourful, engaging to engage with. And I also thought that I didn't want to just teach Canadian tort law, but there were common law, fun, interesting, relevant common law judgments around the world, and I wanted to bring in some of that comparative idea too into my teaching materials, because coming from New Zealand, already a foreign country, fairly foreign, not that foreign really, but a country which really looks out to the world to see how the law is developing, I wanted to bring that into my teaching resources too. So I put together this resource with Maddie, who's probably left us by now, but she was looking in online, and she was an amazing RA. The artwork I licensed from a student last year named Lauren Sans Regret. She's very talented. If you want to purchase any of her art, the link is right there in the disclaimers. And so I just wanted to kind of show you what my book was about. You can see, you can find it online. The table of contents appears down the side. It can be expanded. I'll show you, we are up to about this point here in my course right now. We've been through all of this. It's very interactive. You can click through. You can see I've integrated it with videos, for instance. This video here will take us to the case of Scott and Shepherd. Yeah, it's not the most interesting video. But it's all integrated, right? It's a website that you can go to. You can literally bring it up on your phone. And so I thought this is a really kind of powerful way to bring the law to students, both in my class and in other people's classes. Because as a professor, you go out and you pick which book you want to teach from. Well, now there are 4 books out there in Canada that you can choose, and this one doesn't cost $200. So I just wanted to kind of demonstrate some of the opportunities for innovation in the design here. So we'll go to, this is a case that my students got very excited about in today's class. We're disappointed that they're going to have to wait till next week to reach it. An action between Liu and Shen, which was determined in the British Columbia Supreme Court only in 2020. This is a real case, a real action brought between 2 women who barely know each other, have actually really met each other in person, and have been suing each other for all sorts of claims that the judge later says refers to them having kind of no obvious reason for having attacked each other in online forums, but nevertheless did it. And this is actually an incredibly colourful case, because you can read through it, anybody can go online and read through it. And then I include these sort of further material sections at the end, which is kind of further reading to articles and books. And sometimes news articles, like what happened following this, this civil law case, where one of the women unfortunately brought a knife to the courthouse and stabbed the other and is now being charged with attempted murder. Which really brings home to me, I think, the relevance of tort law to people's lives, and that this is really an area of the law that is incredibly relevant and modern, and not just archaic from the 19th century as some other law professors like to present it. Okay, so you can see, right, I'm trying to demonstrate that you can click through. One of the other great things about this particular platform, I love this platform, is that I tried to pick cases that raise a number of different legal issues in the same case, and then split them up between the topics. So there's a tort called intentional infliction of mental suffering, where you really don't like someone and you try to cause them a lot of grief. And then this case pops up again under the tort of privacy, invasion of privacy. And again, under defamation. These women were very active in the law. And again, under harassment, where, according to this judge, that it's not clear that tort law recognizes harassment. But you can see I just click through, and it takes me to these next sections of the casebook, which is something that you don't typically see in an ordinary casebook. An ordinary casebook will normally have one case for one proposition, and you move on and you learn it. And what I found teaching this case last year was we get a really kind of, as we go through the syllabus, we build up a really deep knowledge, not only of the law, but of how it's playing out in these kind of interesting scenarios and like actual events that happen in people's lives, and how a judge actually dealt with them, which I think is really cool. Yeah, so that's the cross references. I've shown you the sort of various videos. I also put a lot of podcasts in there. I used to have to take the bus to get to work. Now I have an electric bike, and I got really bored on the bus until my students told me about podcasts. Then I realized there's a whole bunch of tort law podcasts. So now, if my students are bored on the bus, they can open up on their phone, go to the topic they're interested in, and listen to 39 Essex Chambers talking about damages. This was not going to be an interesting podcast, but I promise there are more interesting podcasts in this book, and they're talking about both the legal principles and its contemporary relevance to people's lives today. Another cool feature of this platform, you can just download it as a PDF, anyone can, and open it up. And here you go, your 800-page PDF. So if you're a professor like me who wants to have the students actually have a physical copy of the book, you can give them a physical copy of the book, and you can delete the pages from the PDF that you're not planning on teaching so that it's not whoppingly fat. And all it costs is the printing costs down at the UBC bookstore. How am I doing? Okay. So I really like this platform, and I get very excited about this book. I basically covered everything that I wanted to say. Almost. And I'm happy to kind of... All right. So the other thing that I did with this casebook, and Maddie, actually, my RA, who's a third-year law student, who's going to be working for the courts next year, she's very bright, was integrate this casebook with these various quizzes and practice exam exercises, which are linked to here, which anyone on the internet can also access. So I first got these set up and I put them on Canvas, and then I realized, well, Canvas is only accessible to my students, and it's actually a real pain for me, because every time I have to teach this course, I have to re-upload the quizzes for a new Canvas page. I don't want to do that. Turns out this job can get quite busy. So instead, I used the old blogs.ubc.ca, which we all have access to. I think students also have access to it, to set up their own pages, which is amazing. Students out there, if you want to kind of create your own sort of professional-looking profile page, just set up your own blogs.ubc.ca. This is like a little cool tip. You can get like, oh, who's this handsome guy? All right. But what I did with this is I used it as an open access way to like showcase all of my courses. So these are my other courses, and put up my other materials. And then created these quizzes that integrate with the casebook. So for instance, we've done trespass to the person, and we've completed that module in my course now. And if you open up that link, it'll take you to a Qualtrics quiz eventually. It's usually faster than that. I've licensed it under a kind of open access license that you can read about by looking there. And it'll ask you, okay, well, what is a voluntary action? Well, I don't know. Maybe it's C, an act directed by the defendant's conscious mind. Yes, it is. And then the other thing with this quiz, because the thing about law is it's not really about kind of yes-no answers. So there are kind of limits to what you can do with a quiz. But again, my RA, bless her, put together these explanations to explain why the most likely answer was C in that case. And so you can click your way through, and then as a student, you can kind of do your readings and then reaffirm your knowledge using these quizzes. And that's not all. And this is probably the point at which I'll stop. I also put together these, when you're writing about law or analyzing the law, there's a particular structure that we use. There's a particular kind of, actually I'll do this one here. Is anybody a fan of the Netflix show Never Have I Ever? Yes, we have one. All right, well, I'm a fan. It's about like a girl at high school and her travails. It's not really, I'm not really the demographic for it, but my wife likes it, and so do I. So I wrote this, I've written various kind of practice problems. This is the sort of problem you might get in one of my own exams. And I wrote this kind of, again, open access resource, which helps to structure out how you approach answering a question like this, which the students, I've been told, have also found helpful to try and kind of apply their knowledge in a structured way, not giving them the answers, but giving them kind of a guideline as to how to go about answering a problem. And the great thing about this is anyone in the world can do it, and people have, and then like I can see their answers through my kind of Qualtrics portal and see like where in the world people are kind of filling this stuff out and benefiting from it, etc. Okay, so that is the casebook that I put out. I would like to encourage anyone who's interested in making their own resources. You can go with a traditional publisher, but these days you can just put your stuff online, and it might actually end up being better. So thanks.
So just following after Alisa's example, I'll just check if there's any pertinent questions about Dr. Beswick's research and project. Yeah. Should I give this? Yeah.
What? We could have a floating mic in it.
Thank you, Dr. Beswick. This is really fascinating. I haven't really taken any courses in law school, so sorry for my ignorance. But I think precisely because your interactive website is so fabulous, I wonder what made what may be the remaining reason for a course to still use a physical copy of a textbook, and then how could those problems be addressed through online media?
Yeah. So why do I even use the physical copy? The most pragmatic answer is the students don't have access to electronic resources in their exams. And so I think it's for that reason alone, it's just necessary for them to have a physical copy. It's an open book exam, but it's open physical books just because of the way they do the rules, right? So that when it's done online, but they lock down, you can't do internet searching or emailing or that sort of thing. So, I mean, that obviously could be changed. For me personally, maybe I'm a little bit old school. I think there's a lot of value in having a book that is cheap and is not too fancy, that you can scribble all over and highlight and write in the margins and put question marks and stars and they do. I hope they do. Zach, do you do? See, I can see scribbles. He doesn't have lots of colour like mine. I like colour. But that, to me, I think is really valuable. I think there's a lot of research that suggests reading like a physical copy, you're going to sink in the information a lot better. What I didn't like was having a book where you have all these pages that you're never going to read, because that seems to me wasteful. But I think there's no waste in this because we're going to read all of the pages in this volume by the end of the year.
Thank you so much.
All right, Alahi, you had a question from the live stream.
There's a question online, I'm not sure if it's related to the previous speaker or the one before, but someone's asking that they'd like to know how the keywords were chosen by the students, professors, or in collaborations, and what made you decide to focus on the keywords you chose.
That's one for you. How were the keywords chosen? Perhaps we'll hold that question for the general Q&A. Okay. Why don't you go, Zach?
All right. Okay, so just for reference, I've only been Professor Beswick's student for about a month and a half now, so I'm a very baby law student. I don't know what the law is yet.
Oh, you do well. He sits at the front. I like that.
But I do appreciate this as a resource, and I kind of want to talk about kind of my background a little bit as to why. So to quote, I'm going to get a little personal here, but to quote a lot of second wave feminists, the personal is political. So my grandparents were refugees. They were Palestinian refugees, and so they're from Palestine, and so there was a point after when they had lost everything. My grandpa would tell me there was two things that we still had access to that my grandpa, that my family still had, and one of that was their voice. They still had their ability to tell their stories and their narrative, and the second thing was learning. The thing that my grandpa always says saved our family's life is education. And our ability to learn, and we wouldn't be here today if my grandpa and my grandma didn't have the ability to learn and to access learning and to build a life for themselves after losing everything. So for me and my family values, learning is so fundamental, and so I really appreciate the idea of open access education, of open educational resources, because it's so fundamental to my personal values and to my core family values of education and just as a tenet to that, accessible education. So one of the big things about this textbook is that it is cheap. It is so much cheaper. Like when I had to buy all my textbooks, in undergrad, all of our readings were online for the most part. I did my undergrad in COVID, that's why. Maybe that's not normal, but that was my normal. But when I had to buy my textbooks for law, I got and I saw the receipt. And I didn't even finish buying all of them yet because some are still on their way. But it was $400+. And that's a lot for a lot of students that are dealing with the high expenses of law school. It's a lot of us are in student debt. And so even if, this only mitigates costs a little bit, it does mitigate costs, and that's so helpful for a lot of us. And so I really appreciate that this is a much cheaper textbook. With the quizzes that we get to do online, I have done most of them that we were assigned to do up till now. They're very helpful in verifying your understanding. Cases, case law, not straightforward. You don't you can read it a few times and you still may not get everything. So it's a helpful way that is asynchronous, that you can kind of check your own understanding and verify it and just kind of engage with the cases itself. On the quizzes, we answer questions where we apply the precedent set in the casebook, like as Professor Beswick showed you. And as he mentioned, so this is one of the things that I'm still figuring out in the course. He mentioned that the cases come from across different jurisdictions that we have covered so far. We've had cases from India, Hong Kong, Australia, the UK, Canada. I don't think we've had an American case yet, which...
Coming.
Okay. I was kind of excited about not having an American case. Something about that just excites me. But, America's important. But, so one of the things about answering those questions, I kept, on the quizzes, I was like, what precedent applies? Who has jurisdiction? Because we learned the case and, courts across the world, can influence each other, but obviously the jurisdiction of a case decided in India does not hold precedent. It can hold influence maybe, and if the decision was never decided before, and you're looking at where similar cases were done, but it's not going to hold precedent in Canada, or a case in Australia is not going to hold precedent in the UK. They're different jurisdictions. So that was the thing, and just in answering those quizzes, where I just kept in my answer saying, well, this depends on the jurisdiction, and is this person in Australia, is this person in Hong Kong or not? So that was one thing that I experienced with it. Also, just because we started talking about Liu and Shen, I think it is important for everyone to know that we have a group chat in my small section for his class. Oh. And we have talked about Liu and Shen a lot. We haven't covered it in class yet, but we greatly enjoy it. So the attempted murder trial case, we were sending each other all the news articles about it. It's just very fascinating. It's just these two women that just relentlessly hate each other and it's just very disturbing and entertaining, like an episode of Rick and Morty. Yeah. And just one other thing, just about engaging with Professor Beswick in his course. His version of the Socratic method just there, and the one that he does in class, is so gentle. If you've seen the Socratic method, and my section's very fortunate, we don't have a lot of it, but it's in the paper chase or something, it's just they hammer you until you cry. And he doesn't do that. He's very kind. He's like, let's figure out the answer together, class. So I appreciate that, because it makes learning far more enjoyable, and it makes us all much more excited to engage in class.
You're saying I should be stricter?
No.
Okay. I'm getting that I should be tougher on my students.
No.
All right. Thanks, Zach. Great. Should we open to the floor?
Yeah, so we'll open it to the floor. We do have 2 questions that we can repeat waiting in the live stream, but maybe just before that, we'll see if there's any questions in our live audience first.
Thank you. For Samuel, I'm curious about your updating process for this, because I know law is something that is continually changing, right? And I wondered also, just sort of building on Renren's practice, it sounds like you've involved a lot of RAs in the updating process, or students who've worked with you. Is updating it part of the class, or?
No, yeah, it's a great question. It's actually really simple. So this entire thing is just one Microsoft Word document that uses the templates properly, so that everything automatically converts into this. For updating, I'm a bit neurotic about keeping control of the template, because if you break the template, you cause a lot of problems. So my RA didn't actually do any of the direct updates. What she did was help me find the cases, edit them down.
I mean, that's what I see as updating the information.
So
not
yeah, so updating the
computer.
information. Yeah, so it didn't take us long. We put it together in a summer, or half a summer really. I had a fair idea of the cases that I wanted, and she found the amazing case from India, for instance, that we do very early on in the course. And then last summer, I did a full update. I realized a bunch of the materials was too long, so I deleted. Basically what this consists of is kind of deleted extracted cases. So every time you see these ellipses, I've deleted words from it. But you can always just click here and go to the original judgment text, where you can get the entire thing written out on the Canley site. So updating it is very simple. It's just a matter of opening the document, copying in or deleting out the text that you want. You send it to Canley, they get it up within hours. It's amazing. Whereas if one of the problems with a commercially published book, and you might have noticed, this case is from 2020. I have cases from 2022. Yeah. So
Your ability to put brand new cases in quickly, right?
So I did actually. I released this in May of this year, but I knew there was a Supreme Court judgment on consent that was being handed down sometime in the summer, and so it was handed down in July, and then before the end of July, I had edited the case and put it in the book and re-updated the casebook. So I do my updates in the summer because you don't want your content shifting around during the academic year. It's annoying for the professors. But I was able to do that. It's very simple.
Great.
Any other questions?
Thank you for that. That was really useful. But I had questions about how you determine how much structure is too much structure for students, right? I think this is something that I think about a lot in terms of asking them to write a paper on whatever it is that interests them versus whatever, right? And in both your cases, and in your case, you pick the keywords and then students decide which one among these to work on. And this is basically a sort of syllabus, right, online that you determine and then that students get to engage with. I wonder if you've thought a little bit about students sort of contributing to where the course goes sort of thing, or how do you decide that balance between what students want versus what you want to get out of this course? Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, I think
that's all.
Okay, thank you so much for your question. I think this question is similar to one of the questions in the live stream about the distributed agency between student and me, and to what extent, especially in terms of how the particular keywords are chosen, right? So I have to say, I played a more important role in selecting the keywords, but students sometimes will come to talk to me and propose the words, like the word we're going to work on this term actually is proposed by student, the word run. It's run away, run in the leaving China. So sometimes I usually will follow what is going on in Chinese social media, but I'm not omnipotent and I'm omniscient in literary studies terms. So I do need to talk to my colleagues in popular culture studies to ask for their advice in addition to my own thinking. And sometimes students will propose keywords to me. For graduate students, I will let them to do whatever keywords they want to work on, and I'm more flexible in terms of the choices. But undergraduate students sometimes may ask more, they want to have a structure to start with. So the template I'm presenting to them are generic formula they can subscribe to, but under each section, it really depends on the kinds of substance you are working on. And if there are moments when they find very interesting cases, very interesting perspective, they cannot put them into the existing structure. They can talk to me and they can add additional section for sure. And I will consider that as a very important contribution as well. Yeah, I think it boils down to more communicative in situation between you and your students group. Yeah, thank you for the question.
Yeah, and from my perspective, so the collaborative or kind of open nature of this, from my perspective, isn't so much in the direction of the students, but it's in the direction of other professors. So tort law is typically one of the first subjects in law school that a student will encounter in their first year. I teach the course assuming that the students know nothing about law, which is often the case. I certainly knew nothing about law at all when I went to law school. So there's not so much direct student input into the casebook itself. What I tried to do in terms of structuring it was think about what are the basic building blocks that students need to understand not just tort law, which is what this course is about, but the nature of common law reasoning in itself. And so there's this introductory section which goes through some of the very basic principles that underlie what it is that judges are doing. And then the entire thing is designed to be, on the one hand, to build up knowledge, starting with simple concepts like assault and battery, and getting into more complicated concepts, in a way that, on the one hand, builds up throughout it, but on the other hand, can kind of be picked apart by other professors. So say if you're teaching in another school or another class, you might only want to teach, you might like the book you're using or you have your own materials, but you really like the module on defamation and harassment, so you use that one. And so the idea of it being open access is, well, you can just pick that one out and assign that to your students at no extra cost. It's very easy, and you can pick and choose. And the thought is that there'll probably, hopefully, this is what's happened in America, there's lots of open access casebooks out there now, lots of torts ones, lots of others. Canadians have been slower to catch on, but they're starting to now. And so someone else might make their own one, which, if you're a professor, is great, because you might decide to teach, well, this section from my book and another section from someone else's book, and mix and match as you like to suit the course that you want to create. You had some over there.
One question. Yep.
Pushback. Yeah. Do you guys want some water?
Okay, so I'll repeat the first question, which was, have you ever received pushback when introducing open source resources? If so, where does this pushback primarily come from? Colleagues, administrations, or publishers?
Personally, I don't feel a lot of pushback from my colleagues or my department institution. I think UBC has putting a lot of effort to developing open educational resources, and I've been in collaboration with two open education strategists from the Center for Teaching, Learning and Technology, Will Engel and Ri Nampa. So they are their colleagues that I'm working with each year. They're going to come to my class to give students a tutorial on the importance of wiki page and how to operate a wiki page. So I'm very appreciative of the institutional support on that. For me, I don't think there is a strong pushback against the type of open education projects going on here.
Yeah, I haven't encountered pushback either. I'm a little bit sheepish sometimes, depending on who I'm talking to, just because sometimes you're talking to the authors of one of the other books. But that's normal. That's part of it. And of course, one thing my book doesn't do, which a lot of other casebooks do, is they have a lot of their own original commentary built in. So the editor of the casebook, as well as organising and editing the cases, will add questions and comments and other things. And so I haven't done that with this resource, although I kind of treat the quizzes sort of like that. And I have thoughts for building up actually a wiki inspired by Renren's wiki, building up a wiki that would complement the book, where anybody could contribute to try and build extra commentary around it. So I haven't experienced yet, hopefully not, pushback. What I have had is a number of professors reach out to me after having seen this, some of whom are currently attached to commercial publisher projects, saying they would really like to actually turn their works into open access works too, which is complicated for them, of course, because if you're in a contractual arrangement, I'm aware of some professors who won't be named who are already kind of plotting to get out of their contractual arrangements to let their current books expire and to create new open access books. because I haven't actually encountered any professors who have said to me they really like doing the commercial publications. It's just that's how it was always done. You don't actually make that much money off of it. And it's just that was the medium for how they were distributed. But now we have these other ways to distribute these resources. And as far as I can tell, most professors just want their stuff to get out there. They don't mind whether or not they get any money for it.
Great, thank you. And then the second question was about the keywords. They would like to know how the keywords were chosen by students, professors, or in collaborations, and what made you decide to focus on the keywords that you chose.
I think I already answered that question.
You answered, okay.
Thank you for raising that question.
Yes, there's actually one more question. They'd like to know if either of you have taken accessibility needs into account in your design, for example, things like closed captioning for videos, text for images, etc.
Yeah, so I mean that's one of the strengths of these online platforms is that they do the accessibility for you. So if you're sight impaired, for instance, you can zoom in very very easily. There are tools that will read text for you in audio. So yeah, I haven't been aware of any needs outside of what the platform already provides that are somehow deficient with the book, which is one of the advantages of it.
I think the UBC also offer technical support in that regard. Students are able to mobilize visual and audio materials on Wikipedia as well, if many of them are visual learners as well. So yeah, I think it's an important question and hope the technology can help us with that. Yeah.
All right, I got a question here.
When you look at cases from other countries, are you using the local law like in India or Australia? So you must have a pretty good background of law in a lot of different places.
And
do you compare with what would happen in Canada or?
Yeah, so I select cases with kind of these things in mind. So this case, Kohli from the Supreme Court of India, for instance, which is a pretty sort of horrific case of a battery where basically a doctor performs a hysterectomy on a woman without her consent because she's already under anesthesia, and he thinks that it's necessary, and it turns out it wasn't. So that's a context which could happen in any country. Like a lot of these cases are issues that could arise in any country. But of course, this is a context in India. One of the things I really like about this case is when you skip forward, you see the court engaging with issues of consent by looking to other jurisdictions and engaging with, well, what are the principles of law in those jurisdictions? So here you'll see the judge goes to law from the United States, from the DC Circuit. He considers the test in England, which is known as the Bolam test. He considers Canadian case law, this Rebel and Hughes case, which is a famous Supreme Court of Canada case. And then he discusses, further on I include it, how in India the social context is different from, say, in Canada. And so that might warrant having a different standard of informed consent in medical practice compared to Canada. So as a teaching resource, it's an amazing case because it sets out the basic principles of battery and consent that are pretty much common or very similar across jurisdictions. And I only focus on common law jurisdictions because there is a tradition of looking to other jurisdictions because the common law really, it all stems back from early England. It's all early English common law, and it stems outwards. Well, these jurisdictions still look, especially like, for instance, India. Like this is a great case where they're engaging with Canadian case law, but also recognizing that there is a different social context in India that might warrant a different approach, which, from a pedagogical perspective, is great for the students to see, in my opinion. But I do have, I'll put in a plug because he just stepped into the room, ladies and gentlemen, Professor Michael Douglas, who just literally got off a plane from Australia and even the farthest side of Australia. Because one of my ambitions for the next edition of this book is I've reached out to 9 professors around the common law world, including Australia, New Zealand, Ghana, India, Singapore, Ireland, UK, America, I think that's all of them. And they've all agreed to kind of be an advisory board for a third edition, which will be much more comparative and make this book a resource that could be taught in those other countries, or basically around the common law world. Maybe not America, because they do their own thing. But I realized this book's already being taught by a professor in Australia, because it's already so comparative. The Australian case law already relies on a lot of the same core cases, even if they're not Australian cases, and it's the same thing in the other jurisdictions. So there's a lot of potential for this thing to actually have impact in a lot of law schools, not just in Canada, which I'm very excited about. Plus, I get to make new friends around the world.
Okay.
Thanks, Zach. Lu versus Shen is obviously going down well. I don't know whether you've heard about this, but there's been a long-running case in the UK between 2 women who really hate each other, known as the Wagatha Christie case.
Oh, yeah.
Pitting 2 soccer players' wives against each other, and it's pretty good value too.
Yeah, that might have to make it in.
But I wasn't really going to ask about that. This is the second time in less than 12 months that we've had a talk in the Coach House at Green College bouncing off Raymond Williams' Keywords book, which is beginning to look like maybe the most important thing Raymond Williams did, which is interesting for someone like me who was a student in English at Cambridge when Raymond Williams was still lecturing in the English faculty there. And it's all the more interesting, this comes back today in this cross-disciplinary context with Renren in Asian studies, right? Teaching literature and culture, including popular culture, and Alisa between Asian studies and my own department, English. And I'm sure you've both studied closely the introduction to keywords in which Williams explains how this extraordinary thing came about in a very particular historical context in the 1940s and 50s in the UK, but with a much larger kind of global determination, which seems to me resonates very interestingly now with the uses to which you're putting that methodology across cultures and in the context of literary studies that have made a kind of quantum leap from where they were when I was an undergraduate in Cambridge. A leap for which Williams, in at least the British and Anglophone context, was a real enabler. I'm just wondering whether from your respective points of view, inside and outside English literary and cultural studies, you could add something to my growing sense of the wonder of this book and its afterlives.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mark. As you can see from the introductory page of this project, I make reference to Renren Williams' important book, Keywords, A Vocabulary of Culture and Society. And needless to say, Renren Williams has been a very important figure in culture studies as a field. And I think many culture studies scholars and students are learning from this approach and paying attention to the underlying social and political realities, including the underlying ideologies behind popular culture expressions. So I think the entire book is building upon that kind of methods in culture studies. And as far as I know, there are also several books in Chinese studies using the framework keywords, like keywords in Chinese Cultural Revolution, for instance. So it is a very enabling discourse. And I can also say that after the cultural studies field has being translated and imported to China, mainland China, and I think a lot of scholars are embracing this method to look at cultural production. So yeah, this is a very cross-cultural thing there. And Raymond Williams is also important for popular media studies, right? He produces works about television, radio, and so on, and the difference between the countryside and the urban setting. So social class analysis has been very important aspect for culture studies, British brand of culture studies. So I think, yeah, the legacy is very much prominent in today's culture studies there. Yeah.
This particular sharp focus on how simplifying culture.
Yeah.
It's something you might have thought sooner or later a professor of English literature would say something interesting about it. And finally, Renren Williams did in the 1970s. But do you ever hear anything about Renren Williams in the English department these days?
No, he's forgotten English because Alisa is also is an English major here.
No, not really. Or maybe I'm just not professionally.
I think he's been completely overtaken by his own success in English studies. That will be a nice way of not continuing.
Very nice way.
Just having short memories of how things work in disciplines.
And in the spirit of cross-discipline dialogue, I just want to share a thought based on Sam's introduction of his project. So I've never engaged with any casebook before, and today it's really eye-opening for me. I have this kind of, I know there are many literary scholars in this room. I think it's possible to read casebook as word literature. Right. Given the different cases you gathered from different words, and also the narration here, the way the story is composed is so interesting. And also, it's not just word literature in print, it's word literature in electronic media because of the cross-references you're able to click. It looks like a cyber fiction for me, where the judge's commentary becomes an epilogue or a sequel to what is happening there. But this is totally random, but from a literary scholar's point of view, I find it so interesting.
Yeah, well, you're right. And one of the things that I say to the class during we have an orientation session where they meet their professors. And one of the things I say to them is, often they're very nervous about case. They've never read a case before. And look at this thing. Look how many there are. And I tell them when you first, it's a learning experience, learning to think like a lawyer. That's really what we're trying to do with all of this in the first year. Because when you first read these things, like Lu and Shen, they just seem like interesting and compelling stories. The judge is telling a story about two women who started a flame war against each other on CanadaMeat.com. But what it becomes is, as you go so you integrate into the reading and you engaged in the classes, is you stop reading them like stories and you start learning how to analyze them and identifying the issues that the judge is trying to resolve and the precedents and distinguishing arguments and all of this other stuff, which is what the lawyers do. So you can totally read anybody could pick this thing up and just read a bunch of interesting stories. I tried to find the fun, interesting cases to engage the students, but the skill is to take the lawyer's skill. There's other skills, but the lawyer's skill is to take those stories and to figure out how to analyze them as legal arguments.
I think that actually leads into a question that I wanted to ask you, actually. Because, there's a huge gap in terms of access to legal knowledge in our system, and that's such a justice issue. So many people don't know how our court systems work, it's such a big, huge problem for a democratic society when you think about it. And so I was just when I'm engaging with all the cases in this book with the quizzes online, for me, it's helpful because I can distill it, I can take apart these propositions in the context of being in a class setting. We can talk about it, we can deliberate it, and we have an actual professional who can guide us in the right direction. So I was wondering, are you hoping that that your open access casebook can help people in the non-law school setting also engage with legal education and understanding cases, or is there more steps that needs to be done for that?
Yeah, so that's it's kind of indirectly happening. This website also has very good Google search term integration, and one of the kind of side effects of having an 800-page book on tort law is that all the tort law keywords get used a lot. So what's happened is, I think a lot of the time people will type in, say, defamation, and this, totally unrelated, this is one of the first things that comes up. And so they think it's going to be helpful to them. It actually won't be that helpful to them to understand a particular legal problem, because this is designed as a teaching resource, not as legal advice. But it's bringing them in, right? And I do occasionally get a random email from someone saying, oh, can you give me advice on this? And I say, I'm very sorry, I can't do that. I'm not even qualified to practice law in this country, that's kind of where I see the wiki idea, which I want to build up from this. And I want to do it as a wiki because I don't really want to do it myself. And I'm hoping other people will latch on and start building up the content themselves, particularly with that comparative perspective. And the idea is with this board of international, of lawyers, law professors around the world, is that, well, either they or maybe they'll get their students, or sort of just by virtue of being associated with it, others will be interested in building up. And through the wiki, then that would take you to, for instance, it could take you to advice. For instance, this is one resource that I include in the book, in the introduction to the book, is just the notice of claim form from the British Columbia Courthouse Services, which I use as a teaching tool to show how you actually do this stuff in practice. But of course, it'll take you to the website. So if you want to sue someone, here's your starting point. You just go here. It's actually quite easy to sue people. I've done it before. It's a great, it's not a great experience to be sued, but it's courts are important. Justice is important. And a website like the British Columbia Court's website that sets up an online tribunal that can help people resolve their disputes. Somebody might find this and go take the link and find this and find a way to resolve their own problems that they have.
Well, first of all, thank you both professors for your presentation. I just wanted to build a little bit more on what Sam is saying. This same website that he has hosted his book on is the same website that many lawyers, countless lawyers in Canada would use to look up cases when they're preparing their pleadings. And I can guarantee you, I'm sure it's happened countless times already, even in the short life of this casebook, that lawyers have referred to this casebook to get grounding in. Maybe, yeah. Oh, I'm sure it's happened. And so, because it's the exact same search engine that they would use to look up the relevant case law in British Columbia on whatever tort or whatever issue they're dealing with. But I just wanted to ask you, Sam, if you'd mentioned maybe the possibility, I think, of adding to the casebook, questions at the end of each section on what you do through the quizzes right now. And I'm curious whether you've thought about adding, perhaps at the beginning of various sections, maybe kind of a summary of distilling the kind of general principles that apply to each tort. The reason I ask that is it would be, I'm sure, helpful to readers, but also it's not that uncommon, as you know, for courts to actually cite textbooks, usually these classic case books, those summaries of the essential principles on battery or defamation, just in terms of engaging with the courts, in terms of your voice, or maybe this group of scholars that you've assembled, to actually even be cited by courts and have your kind of case book in a way perhaps influence the direction of the law. So and I should just say I'm teaching torts right now using Sam's casebook, and it's been amazing. So bravo. Yeah,
thanks, Brian. Brian's my colleague, and I convinced him to use it. I was very pleased. So a lot of, I mentioned before, I'm always a bit sheepish about this project because I see the work that, the value added that I did was selecting the cases, organizing them, editing them down. But I didn't write any original text in this casebook except in the little preface at the front. Whereas most casebooks will have original text of the authors that might get cited by a court, which is the ultimate goal at the end of the day. If you're a legal academic, you want to be cited by the courts. So part of the reason I didn't include anything original of mine is then I'd have to actually think carefully about the words that I do, the words that I use. It would take a lot more time because I'm not actually an expert on most areas of the law that I teach in torts. It's just you teach the course, right? But it's not necessarily everything that I write in. And I wanted to get this out quickly, so I thought I'm not going to do anything original. It is integrated with, there are sort of short snippets of little extracts from other people's work that is included under kind of fair use because I'm not profiting off of it. There's some useful resources on how to do fair use stuff for open access materials. But yeah, that's one direction I could take it in. I'm not sure whether I will. I think the wiki will end up serving that role, and then it's a public resource, so I won't really get credit for it. But, it's not all about the credit. So selfless. It's really, my selfish reason for not doing it is I want to spend my time on other projects, and that would just take more of my time to try and make sure I didn't say things wrong. Whereas if I'm just copying in free judgments, well, we can just argue in court whether the judge got the law right or wrong. Sometimes we encounter judgments where we think, actually, I think the judge really screwed that up. And that's in the book because it's a useful teaching resource still. Yeah.
Thank you. My question is kind of a follow-up to one of the ones that was online about people who might object to these types of open resources. And so I use open resources in my courses too, and sometimes publishers get mad. But most of the complaints I receive are actually from students, not from publishers. So I think there's some complaint, there's some concern, right, that if you're reading a book that's published by OUP, Oxford University Press, or something like that, there's a stamp of approval, right?
Yeah.
So if I give a book, the students know that I approve of it, or maybe the university approves of it, and that means something. But it means even more if OUP thinks it's the right book for the discipline, right? And so I guess my question is something like, you said this is quite new for you, Sam, but
yeah.
Do you anticipate something like this? I mean, law stereotypically has a reputation of being slightly more status aware, status conscious than other disciplines where we are getting this pushback. So if you anticipate such pushback, what do you think what will you do? If you don't think you'll get that, why? Maybe the fact that this is hosted on kind of a website that carries some amount of weight within Canada, maybe that does some work. But more generally, I mean, what is the right way to kind of handle this type of concern? Should we ignore it? What's the right way to fix it? Is it something that'll go away as these online resources become more ubiquitous? Or is it in fact something that'll become more heightened as there's more and more garbage out there?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. Law is a very snobby profession, and there is cachet from having your name attached to a good publisher. And so that's part of the motivation for sticking with a commercial published casebook. There's also this idea that maybe it's been peer-reviewed. I'm not sure whether the casebooks, maybe they're peer-reviewed. I doubt that they are, because that would be a really boring thing to have to peer-review from the reviewer's perspective. But so part of this kind of thing that shields me, I guess, is this is being hosted on Canly, the best open access legal publisher, frankly, in the world. It's an amazing platform. Every single lawyer in Canada, without a doubt, uses Canly on a regular basis. It is better than the commercial alternatives for accessing case law and statutes and other things. And so from that perspective, I think the cachet is changing, or either the cachet of being like with a fancy publishing house for a casebook is changing. And frankly, coming from New Zealand where we didn't have them, I just didn't think that much of it in the first place. Or Canly has a lot of cachet in itself, and the fact that the number of professors who have talked to me about wanting to get their stuff on Canly instead suggests, and these aren't little kind of schmuck professors like me, these are like proper established professors, that suggests to me that they see this as a valuable resource. So I certainly haven't had any pushback from students. I don't think that they think they're getting ripped off. They seem to just like that it's cheap. The ultimate answer from other professors' perspective is, well, they don't have to use it. They've got now 4 alternatives. Hopefully there'll be more alternatives in future. And they can choose, let the market decide what's valuable, I guess, is my approach to that. If people find it a valuable teaching resource, they'll use it. If they don't, they won't. Anybody with an internet connection has this. I don't know. I could probably index it with them.
The computers would.
Yeah, it does get indexed on a lot of things, but I haven't sort of Googled myself recently, so I don't know. Pardon? Well, so it's only online. It's not. This is something that I got the UBC book sort of print just for my class and for Brian's class. So it's not, but anyone can download the PDF and make their own physical book. That's the point of it, because this is only about half the book. So if you were to print all 800 pages, you get quite a fat book, and that's a lot of trees. So that's one of the advantages. You only print the pages you need.
Any other questions? All right, so I guess we'll close for dinner. So dinner will be, for those of you attending, It's going to just be at the building just across from this one. The Graham House is going to be upstairs. And please enjoy.
Thank you.